Hello, 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 everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. Welcome back. We're going to be reading Chapter 10 in Beyond Religion, Ethics for a Whole World by the Dalai Lama. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 10, we're going to be talking about cultivating key inner values. Let us recall the two-pronged approach to genuine ethical practice. On the one hand, working to restrain our destructive emotions. On the other, actively cultivating our positive inner qualities. In the previous chapter, I discussed the problem of destructive emotions and explored ways in which, through awareness and regulation of them, we can deal constructively with the challenges they pose. In this chapter, I consider the other arm of this approach. Of the positive qualities that naturally exist within us, the most important, compassion. I have already spoken of this at some length. I have also said something about the virtue of forgiveness in the context of justice. What follows here is a brief consideration of a few of the other key human values: patience or forbearance, contentment, self-discipline, and generosity. Patience and forbearance. We're going to start with that. In the context of secular ethics, perhaps the antidote to destructive emotion with the most urgent and immediate relevance for our everyday lives is what is called So Pa in Tibetan. Though usually translated as patience, So Pa also includes the virtues of tolerance, forbearance, and forgiveness. What it really means is the ability to endure suffering. It entails not giving in to our instinctive urge to respond negatively to our difficulties. But So Pa has nothing to do with being either passive or impotent. It is not a case of tolerating something just because you do not have the ability to hit back, nor is it enduring injustice grudgingly through gritted teeth. Instead, genuine patience requires great strength. It is fundamentally the exercise of restraint based on mental discipline. There are three aspects of patience or forbearance to consider: forbearance toward those who harm us, acceptance of suffering, and acceptance of reality. Patience toward the perpetrators of harm. As I have already suggested, reflecting on the fact that everything depends on a great many causes and conditions can do much to help us tolerate the wrongs inflicted on us by others. When people injure us in some way, it is helpful to recall that a vast array of factors will have contributed to their behavior. When we face aggression or disrespect, it is worth considering why the aggressive or disrespectful people are acting that way. Very likely, their behavior reflects difficulties they themselves are experiencing. Recognizing this can moderate our instinct to retaliate. It is also useful to remember that anger is not something anybody actually wants. When we ourselves get angry, for example, is it because we want to? No, it comes upon as involuntary. Like falling ill, becoming angry is not something we do deliberately. Furthermore, given that the perpetrators of the harm are just like you and me, human beings who aspire to happiness and wish to avoid suffering, they too are deserving of our compassion and concern. Kindness and forgiveness are therefore much more appropriate responses to hostility than anger. As with exercise of forgiveness, we need to distinguish between the act and the actor, between the harmful deed and the person who committed it. While remaining firm in our opposition to the unjust act itself, we can still retain our sense of concern and compassion for the perpetrator of that harm. Patience through acceptance of suffering. An important dimension of the practice of patience or forbearance is the cultivation of greater acceptance of suffering and difficulties, which are in fact unavoidable parts of our existence. This training in patience takes the form of developing a genuine attitude of acceptance of the reality that life involves hardship. To be in denial about suffering or to expect life to be easy only causes a person additional misery. I do not mean to suggest that suffering is somehow good in itself. I simply mean that accepting it will make it easier to bear. Traveling the world, I've noticed that people in less developed countries, whose lives are hard in material terms, often seem more contented than those in more affluent countries, who have relatively easy lives. Beneath the outward affluence in material advanced societies lies a good deal of inner anxiety and dissatisfaction. While in poorer countries, I am often struck by the simple joy one often encounters. How to account for this? It seems that hardship, in forcing us to exercise greater patience and forbearance in life, actually makes us stronger and more robust. From the daily experience of hardship comes a greater capacity for accepting difficulties without losing an inner sense of calm. I agree with that. This is something I have also observed in some of my European friends. Those of my own generation who lived through the hardships of the Second World War seem to possess greater forbearance and strength of character than the younger generations who have never encountered such difficulties. The experience of losing friends and family, living with uncertainty, and making do on meager rations has, it seems, made that generation tougher. They are more able to cope with adversity without losing their humor. Of course, I do not want to advocate hardship as a way of life, but merely to show that if you relate to hardship constructively by seeing its benefits, it can bring you inner strength or fortitude. Sometimes I feel a little bit like, with everything that's going on in the world and with our generation these days, being softer because they haven't experienced hardships in many of these affluent countries, especially, maybe some things need to happen the harder way in order not for them to suffer, but in order for them to have a greater understanding and appreciation. Because it is so well known that we don't appreciate something until we no longer have it. We do, but not outwardly and in a way that when it's no longer there, for example. So sometimes I feel like maybe some things do need to happen in order for people to have a greater understanding and appreciation. Kind of like having a string of horrible relationships and then having one that is so easy and it just flows and you don't know what to do with it because you're not used to that. But you also may appreciate it in a way that you never did before had you not experienced the difficulties from previous relationships. Kind of like that. I don't wish for anything terrible. I'm not saying anything like that. But with hardship comes a little bit of toughening of the skin that we kind of all need to survive. You know, like the ego keeps us alive as a baby. If we didn't cry when we were hungry or sick or needed to be changed, why we would just lie there until we starved to death or our diaper was falling off from fullness, you know, with the worst diaper rash and all this and that and infections. So I think a good balance of these things can sometimes be important. How, though, are we to deal with the ordinary setbacks of life? Again, I find the advice of Shantideva, the 8th century Indian thinker, especially helpful. If there is a solution, then what need is there for dejection? If there is no solution, then what point is there in dejection? I call this the no need, no point approach to dealing with problems. If a problem has a solution, then it should not be a cause for excessive worry. Rather than feeling overwhelmed, we should simply work with determination to reach the solution. If, after careful consideration, we conclude that there is no solution to be found, we gain nothing by worrying. Instead, the sooner we accept that the problem cannot be rectified, the easier it will be to carry on with our lives. Either way, there is no point in excessive worrying. Not only does it do us no good, but it can severely harm us by making us weaker, or worse, it can lead to depression. Of course, this is not to suggest that we should surrender to suffering. On the contrary, accepting suffering, far from being a surrender, is the first step toward combating its harm. By accepting hardship, we begin to see that it is not only entirely negative. It can, for example, be a powerful force in bringing us together with others by enlivening our empathetic, compassionate natures. Above all, suffering helps us to recognize our kinship with one another. And with this recognition, we are no longer overwhelmed by our own difficulties, but gain the strength we need to meet the challenges we face. Personal suffering can also be a catalyst for individual spiritual growth. In addition to making us stronger, it can bring us a kind of humility and help us to be more in tune with reality. These effects of suffering are recognized by all the world's major religious traditions. They are also something I have felt in my own life. I am in no doubt that my experience of exile has given me a deeper understanding of life than I would have had if I were still living in Tibet as the privileged ruler of a country. Patience through contemplation of reality. The third dimension of the practice of patience involves focusing on those facets of reality which we as individuals have the most difficulty in accepting. These may include, for example, aging or death. These topics are often regarded as taboo because many people just do not want to think about them. This seems to be particularly the case in more affluent societies, where consumerism promotes the culture of youth. And yet, contemplating such topics can enhance our well-being. Reflecting deeply upon the inevitability of old age and death and their roles as parts of our existence can lead us to greater tolerance toward these aspects of reality, which otherwise might cause us despair and dejection. As I have already suggested several times, everything in the world comes about as a result of many factors. In any given occurrence, our own actions are only a factor in a greater range of causes and conditions. Similarly, there are always many sides to any situation. When, therefore, we suffer from some misfortune, such as not getting the job we hoped for, it is worth considering that the same decision that disappointed us will have benefited someone else, perhaps someone in even greater need. Though not easy, such considerations can temper our sense of loss with some sympathetic joy at others' good fortune. At the same time, the simple act of moving the focus of our attention away from ourselves will have the effect of making the problem appear less unbearable. The benefits of cultivating patience are obvious. The practice of patience guards us against the loss of composure, and in doing so enables us to exercise discernment even in the heat of difficult situations. It gives us inner peace, and within that space we gain a degree of self-control, which also allows us to choose to respond to situations in an appropriate and compassionate manner, rather than being driven by our compulsions. With constant cultivation, patience, as I have described it, equips us to deal with life's inevitable ups and downs. What is more, there is no doubt that patience is a quality that others appreciate tremendously. Through exercising patience, we naturally become far more appealing to others. It helps us put people at ease in our presence and causes them to enjoy our company. But above all, patience is a powerful antidote to the destructive emotions of anger and frustration. Now there's a part in here that's actually quite long, contentment. So depending on how long we go with this section, I may break this up into 2 videos. Contentment. On my earliest trips to the Western countries, I sometimes used to visit shopping malls. In those days, there were no such malls in India, and it was impressive to us Tibetans to see all the smart shops, with their window displays lit up with all kinds of consumer products. Ever since childhood, I have had a love of mechanical objects like watches, so I found the modern mechanical and electronical gadgets in these stores most attractive. Looking at them, I would sometimes think, oh, I would like this. I would like that. But then I would ask myself, do I really need it? Of course, most of the time, the answer was no. So my first thoughts were coming from some kind of instinctive greed. But as soon as I checked myself and took a realistic view, I no longer felt any need to acquire or control those items. This is what I understand by the application of contentment. Referring to contentment as a key ethical value sometimes creates a little confusion. One might say that contentment is not itself an ethical value, since it concerns one's own well-being rather than that of others. Isn't contentment what underlies the happiness that comes through living with a compassionate concern for others? If so, how can it be regarded as an ethical value to be nurtured in its own right? Moreover, one might say, contentment can't be practiced. It has to be arrived at. When I talk about contentment as an ethical value in this way, what I am really talking about is not a general state of well-being or happiness, but a more specific notion of contentment, which in Tibetan we call chogshe. I do not know of any simple translation of this term in English or any other Western language. And since it is generally translated as contentment, I also use that term. However, what chogshe really means is an absence of greed. Literally, it means knowing what is enough or knowing when to be contented. It means being able to find satisfaction without looking for more. So contentment, according to this view, is something like the virtue of moderation. It implies a certain modesty of ambition or having limited desires. By living modestly and setting reasonable limits, we free ourselves from the sense of insecurity and insufficiency born of incessant craving. By practicing contentment, we allow ourselves to rest in an underlying state of satisfaction, confident in the knowledge that we are living by the ideals we seek to uphold. By limiting our desires and wants, we avoid suffering the dissatisfaction and frustration which greed generates. There is a saying in Tibetan that at the door of the miserable rich man sleeps the contented beggar. The point is not that poverty is a virtue, but that happiness comes not from wealth, but from setting limits on our desires and living within those limits with satisfaction. Cultivating contentment is especially important, I feel, in today's materialistic world of global consumerism. Materialistic society puts people under constant pressure to want more and to spend more long after their basic needs are satisfied. Sophisticated advertising is designed to excite the imagination and to generate a perception that material goods will make us happy, and that we are somehow lacking unless we acquire the latest accessory, gadget, or fashion item. The materialism of modern society therefore makes the practice of moderation and contentment a daily necessity if we are to resist succumbing to a sense of personal dissatisfaction born of unrealistic craving. Controlling our desire for more, learning to live without realistic limits, is not only in our own individual interest, it is also necessary if we are to overcome the challenges to life on earth that our incessant quest for more generates. The material resources of this planet are finite. Add the facts that the global population is rising rapidly and that those in the less developed countries naturally aspire to the same level of comfort enjoyed in the developed world, as is their right, and it becomes clear that our present path is unsustainable. The world's great natural spaces do much to maintain the environmental equilibrium of the planet. Yet forests, oceans, and other natural environments are being encroached on and destroyed. And during my own lifetime, many species of animals and plants have become extinct. So the comfortable modern lifestyles that many of us take for granted and many others aspire to actually come at a considerable cost. The need for contentment is painfully illustrated by the recent financial crisis, the repercussions of which are still being felt across our deeply interdependent world. It is easy to blame politicians for failing to sufficiently regulate financial institutions. Ultimately, though, this crisis was generated by greed itself, by the failure to exercise appropriate moderation and restraint in the blind quest for ever greater profits. Also, as an Italian businessman explained to me, there was excessive speculation. The word speculation itself means acting without full knowledge. In this case, the level of caution and humility appropriate to actions undertaken without full knowledge was clearly absent. Here the problem was essentially one of arrogance and short-sightedness. A third issue was the lack of transparency, which allowed dishonesty and deceit to thrive unchecked. There is nothing inevitable about any of these factors. They are all simple ethical failings, chief among which is greed. And the only effective antidote to greed is moderation and contentment. Of course, in extolling the benefits of simplicity and modesty, I am not suggesting that poverty is acceptable. On the contrary, poverty is a tremendous hardship, one that we must do all we can to end. In addition to making survival a struggle, poverty tends to disempower people and make them feel cowed or demoralized. It can lead to profound mental distress and rob people of any opportunity for improvement of their economic situation. In these ways, it makes the poor suffer greatly. On the personal level, however, the sooner we accept that riches alone do not bring happiness, and the sooner we learn to live with a sense of modesty, the better off we will be, especially with respect to our happiness. Time and geography will always impose limits on how much wealth anyone can succeed in accruing in a single lifetime. Given this natural limit, it seems wiser to set one's own limits through the exercise of contentment. In contrast, when it comes to acquiring mental riches, the potential is limitless. Here, where there is no natural limit, it is appropriate not to be contented with what you have, but to constantly strive for more. Unfortunately, most of us do the exact opposite. We are never quite satisfied with what we have materially, but we tend to be thoroughly complacent about our mental riches. All right, let me take a look at what I have left. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there because even though I read more than half of this chapter, if I read the rest, it's going to take it into a really long video, and I don't like to make too many of those in a row. So I'm going to stop right here with half of chapter 10, I believe is what we're on, and we will read the last half of chapter 10 in the next video. And as I said in the previous video, that leaves us with one chapter, which is 11. That is a longer one. It is the last chapter of the book. I believe it holds some meditations and some exercises that the author will share with us, and then a brief afterword. So we will break this one up, and we will also break up chapter 11. I hope that that's okay with you. I try not to do that too much, but sometimes it's just not avoidable. So anyways, we'll stop right there. And the next topic we will talk about in chapter 10 is self-discipline. And I'm going to be disciplined to stop right there. All right. So until next time, as always, as usual, please take care of yourself. Please take care of those around you. And I will see you again very soon for the last half of this chapter. Okay? Bye-bye.